Okay, so today we're going to be introducing and reading the first couple of pages of Terror at Bottle Creek by Watt Key. Just to give you a bit of background information, it's about a 13-year-old boy who lives in Alabama on the Gulf Coast, who with his dad works as a hunting and fishing guide. They go out to catch alligators, and the boy gets stranded in Bottle Creek during a hurricane, and it's a story of his survival. So with that, let's just hop right in and start reading. Chapter 1. Dad said it was too early to be worried about the hurricane. Okay, so this is the first line of the book. Obviously, a hurricane is really important. It's the first line of the book, so that's something that you have to keep in mind. He's going to continue to mention the hurricane and build up that suspense. So far, all the storms predicted to hit us that season have veered east into Florida. Besides, we'd been through plenty of them before. So, what this really makes me think about is Hurricane Katrina in 2006. So I kind of was had the same attitude during Hurricane Katrina. I thought, there's no way that's going to hit us. Every hurricane turns and hits Florida. So basically, when we evacuated, I only brought a change of clothes. That kind of screwed me over, and I had a change of clothes for 6 months. I ended up going to the thrift store and buying some new ones. So I can really relate to this story so far. It was just part of life on the Alabama coast. I wasn't so sure. The storm I saw on our television was big, and it was taking a different approach than the others. And with a name like Igor, it sounded cruel and deadly. I looked out the window of our houseboat. So I just want to mention, important aspect of this story is setting. I talked earlier about the Gulf Coast and the rivers, and the swamp being a really important aspect of the story. They also live on a houseboat, which is really interesting. And as far as a hurricane is concerned, that's probably not the safest place to be. I'd have to think about the hurricane later. At the time, I needed to worry about Dad's 2 clients waiting outside in their truck. He was supposed to have been back an hour ago to take them on an alligator hunt. Alright, so I'm going to pause again. So the dad, my first impression of the dad isn't that good so far. I'm starting to think already, for the first mention, that the dad is unreliable. So it's really important that first impressions mean a lot. So it's important to keep that in the back of your mind. They'd come all the way from Mississippi, and they were getting anxious. I keyed the handheld radio and tried him again. Dad? He didn't answer, but I didn't expect him to. I knew he was just up the road at Mom's rental house, and he didn't want me to know. Ever since she'd walked out on us 6 months before, he'd been going over there and trying to convince her to come back. I knew she didn't want to see him. Sometimes I think he just parked in her driveway and stared at the windows. So, we get a whole lot of information in that paragraph there. So we know now that the dad, this isn't the first time the dad's done something like this. He has been kind of flaky recently, going to his either ex-girlfriend or ex-wife's house, trying to win her back or just kind of stalking her. But I do want to mention that everybody has a different way of dealing with loss, and the dad here is obviously going through a hard time. And we also found that that the mom left, and maybe it wasn't on the best of terms, since the way he puts it is ever since she'd walked out on us 6 months before. I think that putting it in that way really shows that the narrator isn't happy with the mom. I walked out onto the deck and looked up the riverbank. The tall man named Jim got out of the driver's side and leaned against his pickup under the utility light. He twiddled a toothpick in his mouth and looked at his watch. You get him?" he asked. "He'll be here," I said. The man scraped the gravel with his foot and frowned. My dog Catfish trotted up the ranch and leaned against my leg. I knelt and scratched him behind the ears. There was a strong smell of fish about him. What you been into out there, boy?" I said to him. He wasn't much to look at, a dirty yellow mix of terrier and collie I'd found wandering the riverbank a few years before. Catfish thumped his tail against the deck and whined and trembled with excitement. "We're going," I said to him. "Just hold on." So I really think the author right here is building up a sense of impatience in everybody. So the man, Jim, he really wants to leave. Catfish, the dog, he's ready to go too. And basically the narrator has a huge responsibility here to be like the one person who says, "Hey, we're leaving, just wait, hold on, give me a minute." I heard the short, heavy-set man named Hoss get out of the truck. His feet crunched across the gravel. "Maybe we ought to call it off," he said. "He'll be here," I said. Well, we all heard Dad's pickup coming down the hill. He stopped behind the two men from Mississippi and got out while pulling a ball cap over his head. He hefted his jeans, which always seemed to be falling off him these days. He'd been thin and wiry his whole life, but ever since Mom left, he looked like he didn't eat anything. She'd sucked the life out of him in more ways than one. So here we're getting another double description of the dad. Thin. He's always been thin, but he's extra thin now that the mom has left. And the mom, well, again, we don't get a good impression of the mom. She'd sucked the life out of him in more ways than one. So we already know that she sucked the life out of him because she left to be in the first place. But I guess we can assume or infer that there's other things going on, that maybe she's a manipulator and the narrator really does not like him. But, like her rather. But the dad just can't get over her. "Anybody ready to see a 10-footer? He said. "We been ready, Tom," Jim said. Dad approached them and shook hands with each. They grinned reluctantly. Dad put on his carefree act, which used to come naturally to him. "Sorry about that, fellas. I'll make it up to you. Gonna put you on old No Name tonight. Big rascal I've been watching grow for 15 years. So now we have this description of, or this dialogue from the dad for the first time. And it really kind of clashes with the description that the narrator has been giving. He comes jovially up and says, "Anybody ready to see a 10-footer? I guess he knows he screwed up, but he's also kind of playing the guide. He has to be a bit of a personality. So that's something to keep in mind, that maybe his outward appearance isn't totally accurate to his actual character. "Sounds good to me," Jim said. Dad turned and crossed the ramp onto the houseboat and rolled his eyes at me like some people just don't understand. Well, I understood. He was wasting his time and everybody else's carrying on about Mom like he did, and it was embarrassing. But how does a 13-year-old tell his dad he's being a fool? Alright, so we're going to stop here again and say that we find the age of the narrator and he's 13. Let's just stop and think about the character for a second. So far he's seemed very mature for his age. 13 is pretty young to be basically out on your own, and then hosting these two guys that are waiting to go alligator hunting with the dad. He seems pretty independent and self-reliant, and he also calls him like he sees him. So he is being very straightforward about his father. He says, how can he tell? It was pretty embarrassing that that his dad was so hung up on the mom. So we're going to stop here for today, and I'd like you just to keep these couple things in mind. The setting, again, it's the Gulf Coast. It's really important to the story. We also have the hurricane going on. We haven't heard much more about it besides the first page, but it'll be a recurring thing that comes up in the story. The dad's sense of loss is really important in this, and it also affects the narrator a lot. And it kind of makes us think, like, what happened with the mom? And then the narrator's isolation is a really important thing to keep in mind when you read at home tonight.